prairie,
to the oceans wide with foam.
God bless America,
my home, sweet home.
from mountain
To the prairie,
to the oceans,
wide with foam.
God bless America.
My home, sweet home.
God bless America.
My home, sweet home.
Being the interim chancellor of this distinguished university. I wish I could be with you today to commemorate the 1919 Boston police strike, which was a complex and deeply influential event with both local and national repercussions, and to celebrate the achievements of the remarkable team who have worked for 7 years to research the lives of the more than 1,100 strikers. The 1919 Boston Police Strike Project represents a collaboration between the Boston Police Department Archives and University Archives and Special Collections in the Joseph P. Healy Library here at UMass Boston. Their work reflects all the best of what a public research university can be, bringing together community volunteers, family members, UMass Boston staff, students, and faculty in a collective effort to explore and understand the past through rigorous archival research. In the process, they are creating a unique data set that will be available online to serve researchers, students, and family historians well into the future. The commemoration today of the 1919 Boston police strike is a significant milestone in this ongoing project. I would like to especially thank the Boston Police Patrolmen's Association, who are commemorating the centennial of their own union history this week, and who provided significant support for today's event. This is a major contribution to public history, and we are all very proud of the work our librarians, archivists, historians, and volunteers have done to mark this momentous period in labor history. Again, welcome to you all, and enjoy the program.
What are the causes of the formation of this city's policemen's union? What are the roots of our affiliation with the American Federation of Labor? The first is the Boston Social Club and its benefits to the Boston Police Department. There is too much we have not received, owing to the throttle of the police headquarters, which was continually at the throat of progress. After 13 years, we came to the conclusion that the Boston Social Club was not a success. The men in bringing grievances that would result in material benefits for us were always throttled before they reached the commissioner. Next, the hours of labor. The only right we had under the law is 1 day off in every 15 days. And even then, we cannot leave the city limits without permission. We know how useful is the patrolman delivering unpaid tax bills when it is the duty of a civilian employee. We know the uselessness of 15 men on duty at a Sunday band concert when 1 or 2 would do. Then there are the captains, sending men in uniforms on errands to collect lunches, Sunday dinners, newspapers, etc., without even mention made of compensation. This duty is distasteful and much against a man's pride. Police captains making messenger boys out of officers instead of adopting the tactics of honest, grown-up policemen. The next issue we addressed is pay. We work no fewer than 83 hours per week. Some of us as many as 98 hours per week. And we earn on an average of 25 cents an hour. And do not forget, we are forced to pay $207 out of that money that we earn to pay for our uniforms and equipment. We also protest the matter of promotions within the police department and the improper conditions of civil service examinations. Mr. Curtis reserved the right to disregard a man showing in a competitive examination and to promote another man whose name might be at the very bottom of that eligibility list. We consider this one of the most contemptible things which we now face. In one of the station's houses, where we live and where we work, some of them are good and perfectly sanitary. Others are unsanitary, and some are deplorable. For example, in Division 2, there is but one bathtub for 135 men, and only 4 toilets. The vermin are so numerous in that station that the leather is eaten off the helmets.
Oh my God.
An investigation that was conducted in 1909 revealed these conditions, but no action was taken over these past 10 years. The reason given was the city could not afford to make the improvements. So on August 15th of 1919, right here in Fay Hall, we voted overwhelmingly to unionize and affiliate with the American Federation of Labor. Then Commissioner Curtis issued a general order forbidding officers from joining non-police organizations. And yesterday, he adjudicated 19 police officers, including myself, to be guilty of violating that order by joining a labor organization. Last night, he issued an order suspending the 19 of us of duty until sentences are imposed. The Policemen's Union was formed for the sole purpose of breaking the shackles and chains of bondage, now coupled so strongly about the hands and feet of police officers, that could only be brought about by our affiliation with the American Federation of Labor. In consequence, the city's police union, 16807, has once and all come to stay. Our union will exist and maintain its affiliation with the AFL as long as there is a policeman in Boston. We now have no choice but to fight for our right to unionize, to strike, until our union is recognized and our grievances are addressed. And so, I ask you now, brother officers, how do you vote?
On behalf of Peter Golden, we vote yes.
On behalf of my father, Timothy J. Curtin, I vote yes.
On behalf of my grandfather, John T. Thompson, I vote yes.
On behalf of my great-grandfather, Malachi McGrath, I vote yes.
On behalf of my grandfather, John J. Cronin, I vote yes.
On behalf of Charles Riley, I vote yes.
On behalf of my grandfather, Daniel Mayo, I vote yes.
On behalf of my great-uncle, James Francis Cripp, I vote yes.
On behalf of my grandfather, James Gillespie, I vote yes.
On behalf of my father, Dan O'Neill, I vote yes.
On behalf of Patrolman Richard Emmett Gillerin, I vote yes.
On behalf of my father, Daniel O'Neill, I vote yes.
On behalf of my great-grandfather,
James Garrity, I vote yes.
on behalf of my great-grandfather,
I vote yes!
and I vote in favor of my grandfather, also William Downey, yes.
On behalf of James Good,
Edward Burke, I vote yes.
on behalf of James Good and Darby Good, our grandfather and great uncle, we all vote yes.
My grandfather, my father.
We vote yes as an entire family.
On behalf of my grandfather, Thomas Joseph Fallon, we vote yes.
Daniel O'Neill, I vote yes.
Mayor, who was dismissed with you, I vote yes.
Stephen Whalen, we vote yes. 13 men dismissed on the 28th, on the 8th rather, I vote absolutely yes. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren are here to attest to the same.
Sullivan, we vote yes.
On behalf of my great-grandfather, Jeremiah Sullivan, we vote yes.
Father, Richard J. Austin, we vote yes.
Peter Riley, I vote yes.
Grandfather Michael Gormley, I vote yes.
Michael Horgan,
We vote yes.
my grandfather Thomas Jones, I vote yes.
O'Neill, I vote yes.
On behalf of my grandfather, Patrick F. Brandt, we vote yes.
Owen Sullivan, we vote yes.
Grandfather Peter Golden, an immigrant from Sligo, who was fired for abandoning his duty, they said, and was never hired again in the city of Boston, but he educated 11 children.
We vote yes.
A total of 1,137 men have voted, and the count is 1,134 votes of yes, 2 votes of no, and 1 blank ballot. And so, brothers, unless Commissioner Curtis rescinds his order this evening, September 9th, at the 5:45 roll call, every union member will turn in his badge and gun at his station and come to this hall immediately after. We do not take these steps lightly. We stand together throughout whatever comes. Godspeed and God bless our union.
For their training and improvement in wages and working conditions. These are some of the Boston police officers who made that fateful decision to strike. The 1919 attempt by police officers to form a union, the strike and the aftermath, was a pivotal event in the city of Boston. Today, in commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the strike, we reclaim the memories and the stories of these courageous men.
Very mundane daily records, but the bit of history we have left is with me. And in the 11 years I've been there, I've received more questions about was my grandfather a striker, what happened, than about any other question. This is a centennial, and it seemed a good time to learn more about it. I want to welcome all of you, families of strikers and Boston police officers, both serving and retired. Whether by blood or by badge, you are the heirs to the legacy of the men of 1919. Thank you to the researchers, the genealogists, the UMass students, and the staff and striker descendants, and others who have made the story of individual strikers permanently available to families, students, and researchers. Police Commissioner said, "This country will not be a permanently good place for any of us to live in unless we make it a reasonably good place for all of us to live in." The police officers in Boston in 1919 were asking for very modest working conditions and salary. Their wages had been frozen for years, and the hyperinflation that happened during the Great War had cut their buying power in half. They worked 89 to 90 hours per week, and they were never paid for overtime. A quarter of the police department was detailed to the elevated railway employees, or the Commons Union strike. In the summer of 1912, the police had performed more than 19,000 extra duty shifts for the Boston Elevated Railway strike. Ironically, many of the younger police officers had worked for the L before becoming Boston police officers. They thought that was security and a better pay, but over time that didn't prove to be the case. There were strikes by telephone workers and marine firemen, and even strikes in Lowell and Lawrence, and sometimes the Boston police had to go there. And they would watch these workers get rights and get pay increases while they had none. And those strikers, which included many women workers and many immigrants, declared that they wanted not just a pay increase, bread, but they also wanted basic respect, roses. And the Boston police felt the same. I chose this picture because the Bread and Roses strikers are marching with the American flag. It was very popular in 1919 in some circles to equate the labor movement with the anarchist movement, which was also active in 1919. But they were quite different. These workers carried the United States flag as their banner. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, Sr. would compare the striking police officers to the Soviets in Russia. This is a list from the records of the Boston Police Commissioner for 1918, and it goes on into 1919, showing the Boston police officers who had taken leave to go to Europe and fight in the Great War, and now they were being signed back into the department. I looked them up, and everyone on this list was among the strikers in September. At the bottom, you will see the name John F. McGinnis, who in middle age, well into his 40s, left his wife and family and his job with the police department to report for active duty, his 4th time serving in the Army, the social club, and eventually the union movement. And I think you can see how resolute he was in this photograph. With them because they owned the equipment, they had to buy it at several $100s a piece, which was a lot of money in 1919. At the end of 1918, Boston mourned the sudden death of Police Commissioner Stephen O'Meara. He had built the Boston Police Department over a dozen years in the 19th century and was described as holding a series of lesser jobs ever since. And of course, it was Boston that had to pay the expenses of the police officers. Curtis refused to advocate for a pay increase for the police, saying the city could not afford it, the unmaking of many Boston families. More than 1,100 men were suddenly searching for work in a city that was transitioning from a war economy to a peace economy, and just as thousands of returning war veterans were arriving in Boston. There was a different story for every family. Some families became quite desperate. The 1920 census shows the children of one striker scattered between various relatives. Another appeared on the books of a social service agency, needing help to meet the most basic needs. One striker, with 5 children, used an alias to obtain work at Jordan Marsh. After several years, his secret was discovered. Management gave him his walking papers and said that he had some moxie to take a job at Jordan's, since so many windows had been broken during the strike. The grandson of another striker was blacklisted, could find no work, and one striker who was blacklisted found no work, and his grandson told me that his dad, the 14-year-old son of the striker, had to quit school at age 14 to go work full-time at the A&P market. By missing high school, this young man himself was less able to support his own family when he grew up and had a family. So the economic hardship went on to the next generation in some cases. But of course, the Boston Police Department was managed by the governor, not the mayor or city council. By the time James Michael Curley was elected governor in the 1930s, replacing the new officers with the former officers would have meant firing younger men who were war veterans and replacing them with older men who had been away from policing for many years. It never happened. Once they realized they would never work again as Boston police officers, some strikers found work in police departments in other towns. They were already well-trained and very experienced. But this meant relocating their families permanently away from Boston and away from their extended families. Many flourished in their new positions, and at least a dozen of them became chiefs of police in their new departments, back to the fire department, and worked their way up through the ranks. They had already taken the civil service exam, so they could go back. While the strikers were all men, the women and the families played their part. A few weeks after the strike, close to 2,000 women who were related to the strikers gathered at the Commons Union Hall to strategize. This is Fay Hall. It's above J.J. Foley's pub in the South End. The Salvation Army provided refreshments to the 2,000 women. In 1921, when the Boston Police Department appointed its first women officers, 6 women, it turned out 2 of the 6 were wives of strikers. This is just 2 years after the strike. The police, I found this document, the police who did the background checks were asked to provide an explanation for this. They were not the crackerjack investigators we have today. Here is Margaret McHugh of Brighton. She had been a supervisor with a telephone company. And then Agnes Callahan, then of East Boston, had been a librarian before having children. Association. Their papers are at Northeastern University, and I went to visit them one vacation day, and yes, there were newsletters and invitations to teas. And then I noticed there were pictures of them with the governor, and the cardinal, and the mayor, and I didn't understand what was happening. And it turned out that they were lobbyists. There was no police union, and so the wives formed an association to lobby for legislation that would advance the working conditions of the Boston police officers. Is George Ferreira, and he ran for city council but was not successful. Hugh Garrity was elected to the Labor Committee. Representative Garrity introduced such bills as an act to increase the minimum and maximum workman's compensation paid to injured employees, or an act to provide sick pay to injured workers and mechanics employed by the city of Boston, or an act regulating promotions in civil service, saying that the highest scored person should get it, not the commissioner's favorite. He would often respond to sudden deaths at the request of the new police. Some officers eventually started their own business. Today, in 2019, a real estate ad notes for a Dorchester home, a Driscoll-built home is a Dorchester classic. Features include hardwoods, china cabinet, chair rails, crown molding, fireplace, all the classic Driscoll amenities, and ready for you. And he was a long-distance runner before joining the Boston Police Department. Festus won the Brockton Half Marathon and placed as well as second in the Boston Marathon team here. Division 16 in the Back Bay, was a bachelor when he lost his job. Dan went into the insurance business and at age 40 married a much younger woman. They were blessed with 12 children. The middle 10 were girls. Now, Bostonians of a certain age will remember the O'Neill sisters of Jamaica Plain, who led the Easter Parade down Commonwealth Avenue every year. Mrs. O'Neill, as talented seamstress, made their 10 matching outfits herself. The O'Neill sisters appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show and in Life magazine, and we are happy to have the descendants of Dan O'Neill and Julia with us today. Descendants, or notable kin as we mark them in the database. And perhaps the most prominent is former Irish President Mary McAleese, who was the grandniece of Patrolman John H. McCullough, originally from Belfast. Young officers in 1919 were more likely to go on strike than older officers, perhaps because the older officers were worried about their pension. Patrolman McCullough had every reason not to strike. He had been widowed with young daughters at a young age, and he had to put them in care. The family was broken up. When his daughters were a bit older, he was able to hire a housekeeper and brought his girls home. Eventually, he married the housekeeper, Catherine, and had another large family. With all those children to support, support from high school down to diapers, Patrolman McCullough took a stand. And after the strike, he worked as a bank guard. But on his death certificate, it recorded that he was a retired Boston police officer. It was President Mary McAleese who mentioned her connection to a striker when she visited Boston about 10 years ago. So the story is continued in Ireland. This is Timothy Curtin, originally from County Kerry, who was among the strikers, had been a carman first, and with him is his son, George Kurt Curtin, whom we're happy to welcome today. Where is that? Kurt Curtin called me after the 90th anniversary in 2009, saying he had something I had to see. So I drove to foreign parts out to Worcester to look at his book. Tim Curtin was the secretary of the Boston Social Club. The social club kept meeting for years after the strike. Initially, they were trying to get their jobs back. Then it became an annual get-together that have a mass and a picnic, bring the family. Eventually, it became, it was monthly meetings, but it would also be an annual mass in memory of the departed members. And Kurt Curtin had the book, the records of the social club from 1939 to 1969. These are now digitized and they'll be part of our database. You can see the record here. We hope you all read script, which is hard for the young ones. The man said, I have an extra apartment, a living space in my house, and I would like to help some striker who now in his old age may have fallen on hard times. So they really had a devotion to each other. And this was from the Secretary of State's office, what gave them their charter. And then you can see the membership cards they had going right up into the 50s with the badge and the shaking hands there. In 1949, so they had to rent a hall in Dudley Square, and for $3.50 you could come. There would be a turkey dinner, and there was dancing till the wee hours. In our 1,142 names, there are 31 Sullivans. I'm a Sullivan. I'm not related to any of them. And a few weeks ago, I got a call from a descendant of one of the Sullivans. I said, let me see what else we can find on this one. Coleman Sullivan. You can see from the cards, it was assigned first to Division 7, then to 18, which is all the way out in Hyde Park. I don't know who was mad at him for that. It was right out there. And then to Division 1, which was downtown and much easier to get to. SS Hibernian. There were about 12 ships named the Hibernian. A better genealogist than me found the right one. And when he arrived in Boston, the record shows, he noted that he was going to his brother's house on C Street in South Boston, and that he had $2.50 in his pocket. A few years later, he married the lovely Annie Eulalie Connolly in Maine and settled in Boston with a new job as a police officer. The newspapers show that he rescued people from burning buildings. Here is Coleman Sullivan profiled in a big story after wrestling with an armed man who was intent on killing his boss, who had just fired him in the North End. Even when he disarmed the man and kicked the gun away, knowing that Patrolman Sullivan was armed, the man continued to resist and to fight him. But Patrolman Sullivan won the day. Daughter of John Mooney became a nurse and organized nurses in the 80s at Old Boston City Hospital. The grandson of James Gillespie was head of his police union. Out in California, working for Kaiser Permanente, a healthcare conglomerate which is trying to cut the health care of its employees. So the beat goes on. So today, and on Monday, September 9th, the actual centennial, and perhaps every day, we should applaud those heroes who sacrificed to give their families a better life and each of us a better Boston. Thank you.
Around the 7th or 8th grade of grammar school, when I was studying the Boston police strike, and I came home and discussed it with my mother, who said my grandfather was a Boston patrol officer. I never heard my grandfather discuss being a patrol officer. I never heard my family discuss it. and I really was upset when they stamped his card, abandoned his duty. I never knew my grandfather, Martin Cosgrove, to abandon anything. He never walked out on a job. He never walked out on his family. He was a tough Irishman that would see things through. After the strike, and he could not get his job back, he started a milk company in Dorchester, Cosgrove's Milk. He started with 1 horse and wagon. He built his business up to about 12 or 13 home delivery trucks. And he became a true success story. He probably had a much better life with his company and providing for many men. My grandfather Martin is my hero.
As Grant, one of the strikers in 1919, and he often spoke to us kids in the 50s as we were growing up that he would patrol the district around Columbus Ave, Nealon Street area. He spoke of how much he loved the people that he met in that Nealon Street area, how hardworking they were. And his other district that he spoke about was Franklin Street. He was on duty the night of the Great Molasses Flood, and that was probably one of the, if not the most significant event of his career. He spoke of how they ran toward the flood. According to him, they were able to save quite a few people. Nearly lost their own lives, some of the men and the patrolmen they were helping. However, he never got over the Boston police strike and how much it hurt him to lose his job. He was angry still in the 1950s and resentful. One of the big things I remember from our childhood was the communion breakfast that used to be held, and I believe it was the Boston Police Benevolent Association, and it was their big communion breakfast, and it was a big deal, and so every year we went to that, and that was one of my childhood memories. He had a good life. He was a good man. He was a great grandfather. I think he was a man of great honor and principled convictions. He was tall, he was handsome, and he was a man who expressed his political opinions liberally.
So it took a lot of gall, really, to go out and do something like this, to strike. He was a person that was heavily into workers' rights at a time when it wasn't fashionable. And I think in the case of the Boston police strike, he certainly paid the price for his views. Post-strike, I found out how he survived. I heard when the strike happened, he sold his uniform on the street. He did not have the stability that he had as on the Boston police force, but the lack of money during the 30s, depression, it was not a particularly great time.
So 6 children. The oldest of the strikers was William Ford, who was 60 years old. He was born in 1859. The youngest of the strikers were 4 26-year-olds, and those who survived the longest were 3 who died in 1984, including Jeremiah Sullivan,
either kept the story alive through the generations, or in some cases are still learning about things that perhaps the family didn't talk about. We have people from as far away as California. We have people who are in their 90s who are children of strikers. Could the families either stand or wave and be recognized?
I would like to thank
Boston Police Patrolmen's Association, especially President Mike Leary and Treasurer Bobby Colburn, the City of Boston Credit Union, Brenda and Tom O'Brien, the strikers, who will lead to you a city proclamation. This is a day for police and for families, but the City of Boston issued a proclamation recognizing what is happening. And we would like to invite former Congressman Bill Delahunt, grandson of the striker Thomas Delahunt, to share a story of his grandfather and read the proclamation.
The Delahunts. And I can see three of my cousins up there. Tom, who voted the right way, and Matthew, Michael, and my two daughters, Cara and Kirsten Delahunt. Today, enriched by the work that you all do. It really is very, very good. You know, when you hear the history and you see that stamp on that card that says, abandoned his duty, we know better. They were abandoned. Commissioner Curtis and Calvin Coolidge. I guess maybe that's why I'm a Democrat. And I tell you, we didn't know my grandfather. He died in 1932. I might look that old, but I was born in 1941. But many, many years ago, I had the honor of serving in the state legislature. And there was a bill that was put forward by the Boston Commons Union. Now, you've heard references to them during the course of the past hour. And the bill would have authorized strikes by public employees. That's pretty radical stuff, okay? And this is when the House was 240, the state House, the House of Representatives. He said, Delahunt, what are you doing? I said, this is for my grandfather. By Mayor Walsh, and I'll be brief because I know the day is short. You see that 5:30 is fast approaching. Whereas September 9th, 1919, more than 1,100 Boston police officers put themselves on the line to fight for recognition of their union, for fair wages and decent working conditions. And whereas the Boston Police Department files claim that each officer abandoned his duty September 9th, 1919, historical records and family members show these men fulfill their duties as soldiers, as sailors in the Great War, as law enforcement officers in many cities and towns, as civil servants in various public positions, as business entrepreneurs and workers, and as husbands, sons, brothers, and fathers, setting an inspirational example for later generations. And whereas the aftermath of the strike affected entire families who inherited the legacy of a dramatically influential and controversial event, and who have preserved stories and images of the lives of the strikers for 100 years. And whereas 82 volunteers devoted more than 90,000 hours over 7 years to document the lives of the strikers through meticulous research. And whereas staff from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, Ely's Library, and the Boston Police Archives brought together community members, family members, students, retired police officers, and many others to commemorate the lives and stories of the striking officers on the occasion of the Centennial, which resulted in the public website that was just referenced, for the benefit of all. Now, therefore, I, Martin J. Walsh, Mayor of the City of Boston, do proclaim to be 1919 Boston Police Strike Project Day in the City of Boston.
Thousands
best wide receiver in football.
Mikey, anything going on after this?
I don't know. It was the food. That's what.
Make sure